Good evening, Houdat Nation, and happy Wednesday on a Thursday to all of our Bayou Blitz family. Once again, we flex our muscle by showing that we are powerful enough to move days of the week. Your Bayou Blitz show is coming to you this week, as you know, if you're watching live on Thursday. I am Bob Rose. I am one of your co-hosts to your Bayou Blitz podcast. Joining me, back from his latest road trip, is my partner, Brendan Boylan. How are you tonight, Road Warrior?
Road trip. What did you call it? World tour continues.
Mm-hmm.
This one wasn't that far, but you took the blame a couple weeks ago for switching days, so I will take the blame this time. Traveling, there was just no way I could have been a cohesive person if we did it last night. But nonetheless, we're here. I am still traveling all around the place, so it's been fun. It's nice that the weather's starting to get warm. Before we get too deep, anybody out in the Northeast, hope you guys are doing okay. Bob included in that. I saw pictures of New York and New Jersey, and it looked like a war zone. It looked like a movie scene.
Yeah.
And I know that stuff is traveling as well. So you guys, with the high risk air quality over the next couple of days, like, please be careful, please be safe. Don't let too much of that junk get in your lungs, and stay inside if you can. I'm just, being our national health spokesperson tonight. I don't think that's a good title for me, but nonetheless, I'm doing fine, Bob. I'm doing fine. Hope you and Lauren and Will are as well. It's been a little bit of a quiet period when it comes to New Orleans Saints football. So we have a little bit to talk about today, and we're getting towards the end of OTAs. So I figured it's a good time to kind of recap guys that have really stood out, and just little things that, what do we talk about with John? At this point, you're starting to see those training camp delights, your OTA heroes and whatnot. So yeah, we have some of those guys that have certainly grabbed some attention, but we're gonna have a good time kind of talking about a little bit of everything. So Bob, let's start with some happy news that you actually wrote about this week, and that is about an old friend, Jabari Greer, Super Bowl champion with the New Orleans Saints. He will be inducted into the Saints Hall of Fame this year. What information you got about Jabari, and one of the highest honors in the franchise?
Yeah, for sure it is, and congratulations to Jabari Greer, one of my favorite Saints players from that Super Bowl team, and an underrated pickup for that defense. They picked him up in 2008, formerly of the Buffalo Bills, and he, along with Jonathan Vilma, Scott Shanley, Scott Fujita, were kind of the final pieces, along with the 2009 first-round pick Malcolm Jenkins, were kind of the final pieces of putting together and what was a very underrated defense for the eventual Super Bowl champions. Jabari Greer gets inducted into the Saints Hall of Fame. Congratulations to him. He follows on the footsteps of Devery Henderson and Fred McAfee last year, and brings the number up to 58 people in the Saints Hall of Fame. That includes 54 players, one coach, one assistant, one general manager, and of course, former owner, the late Tom Benson. So, certainly a big honor to for Jabari Greer, and I don't think this is not the last of that 2009 squad to be inducted. With such an honor, we expect several other players to get in there. Obviously, people like Drew Brees, Malcolm Jenkins, Sean Payton. You have to be retired and removed from the Saints organization for at least 3 years to be eligible. So that's why that hasn't happened for them yet. But you can rest assured that it would be. Brendan, since we're on this subject, what? And again, discounting Breeze, Jimmy Graham, who's not eligible yet, Malcolm Jenkins, Peyton, discounting the guys that aren't eligible yet. What player or contributor, coach, general manager, do you believe should be in the Saints Hall of Fame and is not?
Well, let me go ahead and first pull up a list to make sure that I'm not forgetting anybody that is already been inducted. I'll tell you one right off the top of my head. He actually got an award. I want to say it was like the Fleur de Lis Award, but was not inducted. And this was the same year that Deuce McAllister was inducted for the Saints. And that is Jim Henderson, longtime play-by-play announcer, is not in the Saints Hall of Fame. He's been honored a couple different times, and like I said, got that Fleur de Lis Award. That's coming just from the broadcast side of me. Longtime voice of the Saints. Everybody knows the Garrett Hartley call in the NFC Championship game. Just a wonderful one. Things like that, I think, stick out for a franchise. And I know radio is kind of dying, if you will. But that's one off the top of my head that I think should be in. When it comes to guys that aren't in, they've inducted a lot of Super Bowl champions over the last couple years.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think and make sure that there's no one that hasn't, or no one that has already gotten in that I'm discounting in some way. I know Bob's going to jump on this like no problem. He's going to have one right out the gate. You know, I think for me, there's got to be a member of that 2009 team that hasn't got in.
There are two that will shock you.
I'm looking at the list right now. This was you want to talk about on the fly type of question.
Sorry, man.
No, it's okay. No, it's I love questions like that, because as soon as you said it, I was like, I know exactly where he's going, and that is a great way to go. Let's see. Reggie, Marcus, Pierre, Lance, Vilma, Nix, Smith, Beerman, Tyrone Hughes, Aaron Brooks, John Carney. It's only fitting Brooks and Carney went in the same year, right?
Mm-hmm.
McAllister. You know, let's see. Every member of the Dome Patrol, duh.
You already mentioned one of their names.
Did I really?
Yeah.
You tell me the two that stick out to you, and we'll play the Brendan's shocked face or Brendan needs more coffee roll.
Well, let's actually make this a two-part topic. Then we'll talk about the 2009 members first, and then we'll double back and talk about the older generations players. Garrett Hartley is not in the Saints Hall of Fame, and I realize that Garrett doesn't have the outstanding statistics. But I mean, he was responsible for one of the most iconic plays, in franchise history. The pigs will fly, the pigs will fly, kick. Not to mention the fact that he set a Super Bowl record, with 4 field goals over 40 yards successfully made, in that victory, and that those kicks were what kept the Saints in the game. In the first half in particular. So Garrett Hartley surprises me. And I know what people say. I know what we say when it comes to kickers, but you're talking about a franchise that already has 3 kickers in its Hall of Fame. Morton Anderson, no brainer. Tom Bency, I guess you could say no brainer because of the 63-yard record breaking field goal.
He was only there for like 2 years. So it's really going off of one kick. So I understand your argument for Garrett as well.
Right. And John Carney, who statistically he dwarfs Garrett Hartley, but Carney was on the end or responsible for one of the most embarrassing plays in franchise history. After the River City relay, that improbable flea flicker play that it helped the Saints tie the game on the final play against Jacksonville. What would have kept them in the playoff race that year, went right out the window when Carney shanked the extra point.
Yep.
So, I mean, it surprises me that Garrett Hartley isn't there. It 100% shocks me that Tracy Porter is not there.
See, and I think that is one that was the first name that came into my mind. But again, when you think Team Hall of Fames, I think part of me looks past one, even though it was the most, you could argue, there with Steve Gleason. Is it the most iconic play in the history of the franchise, whether it's Tracy Porter or Steve Gleason? And Tracy had good years, but he wasn't a long, like, lifer New Orleans Saint. He was drafted, played out his rookie deal, bounced around, had a really good year in Chicago towards the end of his career. And then that was it. Speaking of guys that aren't in, I just mentioned, is Steve Gleason not in?
No, he's not.
Okay, so there's my pick right there. Steve Gleason should be in. And again, and no, you're going to sit there and say, like, Brendan, you just said one play. I think if you have an exception to the rule, it is that one. And what he's meant to the city over the years as well.
Right. When you have a statue, you deserve to be in someone's Hall of Fame.
Exactly. If you have a statue, you should be in the Hall. I know him and Drew have obviously formed like a very special bond. Drew's first year of eligibility would be next year, right?
Yeah.
So I could see a situation where they go in together.
Can see that.
I think that would be really neat because certainly you're not going to wait for Sean and Drew to go in together. I don't think that's going to be a situation, though that would make a lot of sense as well. But I think if you did something where Garrett and Drew went in together, or not Garrett, wow. See, I'm already getting names mixed up. I said I couldn't function yesterday. Can't function today either. I think it would make sense to get Gleason and Drew in together. So we'll see. I think having talked through all that, I think that's the one that would shock me the most, is that Steve Gleason is not in, despite having a statue outside the stadium.
And truthfully, Brendan, I think we've reached the point in Saints history with recency bias that is society. Now that the Super Bowl champion team and all those prolific offenses that followed it, those guys are retiring, becoming eligible. It's going to be very, very difficult for prior players or players prior to, we'll call it the Peyton Breeze era, to get in. And looking at Alan Ulrich, our mutual friend, host of Under the Dome. He and I have had the conversation, and he said this himself, that history now is going to overlook some of those past Saints, very, very good players that aren't already in. Guys like, and Brendan and I are friends of these guys, so obviously we're a little bit tilted their way. The guy behind me, Jim Everett, friend of ours, friend of the show. Obviously, Jim's best years came, statistically best years came as a Ram, but he is still fifth in franchise history in passing yards and touchdowns, and season-wide for season passing yards, he holds the top 2 years in franchise history for a guy not named Breeze. So no other quarterback is thrown for more yards as a Saint than Jim Everett, who's done it twice. Quinn Early, another friend of ours, friend of the show. One of only 11 players in Saints history to have over 1,000 yards receiving. That's over 57 years, so that's significant, and still 10th on the franchise all-time list in receiving yards. Those are two guys for personal reasons I'd like to see get in, and I just basically made a case for them. But the guy that really, really surprises me that he's not there, and I believe it's for his personal difficulties off the field, Chuck Muncie. Yeah, Chuck Muncie is a guy who statistically, I believe, good timing. Statistically, I believe, belongs in the Saints Hall of Fame.
I had to go back and look because, the first ones, when you started saying older Saints, the first three that came to my mind were all running backs.
Mm-hmm.
Dalton, Reuben, and George, but they're all in. But I had to double check that, especially because you look at like Reuben and the injuries towards the end, kind of gets lost in the shuffle. George, in a very similar way, had just an outstanding rookie season, and then things kind of peeled off. What about another guy that we've both talked to over the years? A guy like Kyle Turley's not in.
That's true. How can I forget about Kyle? Yeah, Kyle he's not in.
Not in. There's got to be guys on that magical 2000 team that we're forgetting that aren't in. But when you're only inducting 2 guys a year, I think is kind of where they're at. I think what you said holds a lot of value, recency bias, and then not just recency bias, Super Bowl bias.
Mm-hmm.
Especially when it's the only one in franchise history, you're going to look and lean in towards some of those guys from the 2009 team and the years that followed. I'm glad you said Jimmy Graham. I know that there are Saints fans that have a weird internal battle with the Jimmy Graham thing. And I remember exactly where I was when that trade happened.
Yeah.
That's one that really sticks out to you. Like, I didn't see that coming. Like, I knew things were bad, but I did not expect it. And then Jimmy taking some shots over the years too about the New Orleans organization. It kind of, it's weird, but I think looking back, those 4 or 5 years, Jimmy was the best tight end in football.
Yeah.
And if he had stayed in New Orleans, he might go down as the best receiving tight end of all time. I'm a firm believer in that. Some people will disagree with me. I'm a firm believer if he stuck with Drew his whole career, Drew would have made him arguably the best receiving tight end of all time. Maybe
Brendan, it was definitely trending that way, and I absolutely love Jimmy Graham. I had the honor of meeting him at 2014 training camp, and a heck of a guy too. And statistically, it was certainly trending that direction. Everybody wants to talk about Gronk, and I get that. Gronkowski put up some wonderful numbers, but Jimmy and Gronk came into the league in the same year, and Graham was out producing Gronkowski. Now, just to your point, now at the same time, by 2013, 2014, I saw a Jimmy Graham to me that looked like he was slowing down a bit. I don't know, and you really saw that once he got to Seattle. I think it was a matter of just so many teams were taking shots at Jimmy's knees, specifically, his legs, specifically his knees, and I think that was starting to affect him, slow him down. Because a man that big and could move that fast and that quick, I mean, he had such a fluid change of direction. He was a mismatch nightmare as a receiver. And most defensive backs just couldn't bring him down, in conventional ways. So, defensive backs, safeties, cornerbacks, linebackers, they'd take shots at his knees. That's why there's so many highlights of Jimmy hurdling a tackler. Well, he had to. Because tacklers just continuously went low on him. So it's easy to sit here and agree with you about what you said statistically. And like I said, it was trending that way. But in my opinion, he was starting to slow down. I think he'd have been up there for sure. With the Shannon Sharps, the Gronkowskis, the Gonzaleses, Gates, Antonio Gates, all those guys at the top of the tight end all-time list. But I'm not sure if he'd overtake him. His revisionist history always has 20/20 vision in hindsight for sure. And there's no doubt that Sean Payton knew how to use a weapon like Jimmy Graham, who was underutilized when he got to Seattle, Green Bay, Chicago after leaving New Orleans.
Absolutely. Before we get off this topic entirely, I think I have to ask you one more. Well, we'll say I'll have a statement and a question. I think statement in terms of guys that are not named Drew Brees that'll be in within the next 5 years. Mark Ingram,
Oh yeah,
without a doubt, will be in. Even though he was not a part of that Super Bowl team, what right now, at least currently standing, most rushing yards in team history.
Yep.
Most rushing touchdowns in team history. I mean, no doubt, no brainer. But I'll ask you this: if there's a fringe player for you, fringe on getting in, like who is it? For me personally, recency bias. Darren Sproles is my fringe. And again, it was a short time, but record setting in his few years in New Orleans. I think Sproles is a fringe guy. For you, who is your fringe guy?
I'll go two if I may, because I'd like to use the Super Bowl years. Yeah, again, Tracy Porter. Yeah, but not only the Super Bowl interception, but the interception that helped get them there, that was vital in getting them there and picking off Brett Favre. And not only that, he didn't just have those two plays. He had a very solid career in New Orleans. And I look at it this way: if you put a defensive back like Roman Harper in there, and I respect Roman a lot, Tracy Porter was a more valuable member to that Saints defense than Roman Harper, my opinion. But that's why I put Tracy Porter in there. And again, I agree with what you guys said about Muncie wholeheartedly. But I'll go with my friend. I got to go. A quarterback Jim Everett's always going to be overlooked in franchise history. So I'll put Quinn Early in the Saints Hall of Fame.
There you go. Let's get to a couple of these. Anna, Sammy Knight. Sammy Knight is in.
Yeah, he is in, but that's a good one. Yeah, that's another player that a lot of people, a lot of Saints fans, even Saints historians, have overlooked the contributions of Sammy Knight.
Maxie again. Hilliard is in. Just looking at some of the comments. That's funny that you say that, because growing up, obviously my family, New Orleans Saints fans, my father in particularly, when he talked about great Saints, one of the first names out of his mouth every time growing up was Sammy Knight. My dad really appreciated what he was able to do on the field. So that's surprising that there's so many people that kind of overlook it. And I mean, again, 4 or 5 years in New Orleans, maybe 6, somewhere in there for Sammy. So not a lifer. I look at time periods of players with teams, and I kind of go, you have that like 1 to 3. It's kind of like you had a cup of coffee with the team, and then you go like 3 to 5, and you're like, okay, a little respectable, and then like 5+, you're talking about potentially like leaving a footprint, and then you get 10+, and you're like a legend.
Yeah.
And that's kind of how I look at it. And there's not a lot of guys, especially currently in the NFL, that get to 10+. So I think that's why you have to really appreciate guys like Cameron Jordan. And obviously he's gotten his flowers plenty over the last couple of years, and from both of us, and breaking the New Orleans Saints franchise record for sacks. If you want, and there's going to be that argument because sacks weren't recorded that 1 year for Ricky, that, Cam's still a couple off, but
unofficially, Ricky has 123 sacks. So, Cam should even break that mark this year.
Right. I got another one. Eric Martin.
Eric Martin is in.
I closed out the list, so I had to think about that one. I was like, I don't know. There's a lot of guys from those 90s teams that, and you pointed out Jim in particular, like guys from those teams that will go extremely unappreciated. The post-Dome Patrol years go very unappreciated.
Yes.
Because they were not winning football teams. They competed, and they competed hard, but and we talked about, I asked Jim straight up about it, was coming into a team that was under a whole like redesign, if you will. right? You can't. They weren't tanking the season away, but it was a complete remodel of the DNA of a franchise. Like, how hard is that to come in? Talking kind of similarly to Derek Carr coming in this year. This is still a team that's redesigning the DNA post Drew Brees and even more so post Sean Payton.
Mm-hmm.
And he talked about the difficulties of that, but how the city still embraced that team despite the fact that they were saying goodbye to guys that they just knew and loved in the Dome Patrol and what have you. So, yeah, I think a lot of those guys go unappreciated. Bob and I could sit here and talk for hours about Saints history, teams that were underappreciated, overappreciated. Bob and I's favorite argument. We had a whole segment, or not a segment, a whole episode on it, I believe, last summer, was the 11 team not getting its flowers, but like the 17 team getting its flowers. Recency bias. But the 11 team would smack the 17 team.
Yep.
I would even put out the 11 team could maybe not smack, but might beat the 18 team that should have went the whole way.
I believe I've always said that they would have because that was a different Drew Brees.
Very much prime Drew Brees.
Yeah.
And 18 Drew Brees was second in MVP voting, and so was 11. But that's a whole other argument.
To me, 18 Drew Brees down the stretch, he looked like he had a tired arm. And folks, if you want to debate me on this, you're more than welcome. But go back and watch the tape, not the statistics, but the game tape. And his arm looked tired down the stretch. And when they got a bye, when he came back from the bye week during the regular season, he looked refreshed, like noticeably refreshed. When they had the bye in the first round of the playoffs and they faced the Eagles in the divisional round, he looked noticeably refreshed. 2011, that Drew Brees was pedal to the floor the entire way. Good night.
Yeah, Drew in 11 is the greatest season for a player that did not win MVP.
Yeah.
No and ifs or buts. We get you have that come up in history all the time. It's like, what's the greatest team to never win a Super Bowl? Or what's the greatest this? Or what's the greatest player or greatest single season to not win the MVP award? 2011 Drew Brees, and it's not close.
No.
But anyway, let's move to modern Saints time.
Yeah, we keep jabbing at you recency bias people, and we might as well give you some of that recency, right?
Yeah, recency bias. Hey, they actually were at OTAs this week. We actually have news from this week. I want to start with the one thing. Anybody that's joined us or was waiting in the queue for us to go live on YouTube saw that our thumbnail image this week included one Michael Thomas, who returned to the field this week for the New Orleans Saints and was quoted saying that he will be a participant at training camp, and he doesn't believe there's anything stopping him or hindering him from doing so, which is a very positive thing. We talked a lot about Michael Thomas over this summer. There are a couple people that are live in the chat right now that have expressed their feelings on where they think Michael Thomas is in his career. Regardless of what you think, regardless of recency bias of not playing for Michael Thomas, how important is it for not just Michael Thomas, but Derek Carr as well, to at least be out there, and it might be a quarter speed, but at least getting comfortable, familiar with each other, and how important is it for Mike to actually be back out on the field?
Brendan, I think maybe not during OTAs, but I think it's red level critical, for Michael Thomas, to be out onto the field, working with Derek Carr, working with Chris Olave, working with Rashid Shaheed. First of all, I think it's a very encouraging sign. We were hearing some of the old coach speak from Dennis Allen, as recently as last week about there's no timetable for Michael Thomas, but he should be a full go by the beginning of training camp. So that's what a lot of us expected. Now, Mike has been there, during OTAs, which in itself was an encouraging sign. Just not participating. And not unusual for a veteran, and it actually surprised most of us, when he did take the field. What was that on Tuesday? But the reason I think it's encouraging, you're working with a new quarterback. Yeah, you're saying your offensive coordinator is the same. So much of the system's terminology, much of the system's strategy and approach is going to remain the same. But you're working with a new quarterback. We've talked to Jim Ever, we've talked to Quinn Early, we've talked to Lonzel Hill, quarterbacks and wide receivers we've talked to, you and I have. So we know how important it is to get on the same page. You want to know what each other is doing. I mean, even if you learn to play, even when you learn the playbook, you need to learn what the other guy's preference is on hot reads, certain situations, third and fourth downs, against certain types of coverage, things like that. And those are only things that you can get by working with somebody on the field. Repetition, repetition, repetition. I don't care how much redundancy it is. Redundancy between a quarterback and a receiver is nothing but a good thing. You're not going to see Michael Thomas go, be a full 100%, go through OTAs and minicamp. But the fact that he is there working with his new quarterback, who, by the way, he was instrumental in getting Derek Carr to New Orleans in the first place. And Derek alluded to as such, not only before, when he signed, but even this past week that, and I quote Carr when I say, he was instrumental in getting me here. It's just nice to be able to get to work with him on the field. And Michael Thomas's skill set is exactly what Derek Carr likes to work with and likes to target. We've seen it with Devontae Adams, Hunter Renfrow, Darren Waller. Michael Thomas is a more physical and a more precise route runner than any of those three guys. So I think those two. I think those two could be, could put up some terrific numbers if they both stay healthy.
I think for Mike, and this is the comparison I'll use now, given one of these guys is coming off of not playing football a lot over the last 3 years. The other guy is just a superstar that has played, maybe not lived up to expectations. A lot of people were asking, well, where's Alvin Kamara? And we'll go ahead and get this out of the way. To contrary belief, it has nothing to do with his legal stuff.
No.
Why he's not there. He's just historically not shown up to OTAs, which is kind of his thing. And for some players, they don't. They don't show up till they absolutely have to, and they do their own private training. And by the likes of Twitter and Instagram, we see that Alvin Kamara's private training is pretty intense stuff. Very intense stuff. And that's what he just chooses to do. The same reason Taysom Hill isn't there.
Mm-hmm.
Taysom's personally training away from the team and being with his newborn child. So that's fine. So let's go ahead and get that out of the way.
Yeah, they're excused absences, like you said. And Alvin Kamara, we've not seen a lot of footage this particular offseason, but literally every other offseason in Kamara's career, his individual physical training. And Kyle Mosley and I interviewed Alvin's head trainer once or twice before to give us a little bit of insight. It is such balance and strength training, and more intense than anything that any of these players are going to see at their team workouts. I guarantee you that. So, we've never seen it in the past either. Alvin Kamara, Taysom Hill, Michael Thomas, those guys have never come into camp out of shape or even close to it. So I'm not worried about that whatsoever.
Yeah, we're not going to have a Calvin Benjamin problem.
No, we're not.
That's a throwback name for you. But when it comes to Mike, I think that any time we get to see him actually on the field is a welcome sight. Now, Bob and I have spoke a lot about Mike over the last couple months, particularly because both of us truly did not believe he'd be a part of the team.
Mm-hmm.
The fact that they worked something out was quite shocking. And that's with, we didn't have any real inside information outside of knowing what the contract situation was. And honestly, I think even if we were to bring Ross and John on to talk about something like this, they'd be the first to tell you as well. They had no idea that the intention was to keep Mike. When we talk about him, though, we talk about him with high hopes. We talk about the past, the 2018, 2019 Michael Thomas. We don't know if we'll ever get – we might never see an ounce of that again.
Yeah.
Because of injury. I don't think Bob, if I'm speaking out of place, Bob cut me off. I know I don't expect for him to come out and light it up and be an all-pro receiver. I don't think Bob expects that either. Bob might. I don't expect him to come out and just light up the league. Do I expect him to be a guy that has 800 yards, 8 or 9 touchdowns, if not more? Sure. I expect him to be close to 1,000 yards and 8 touchdowns. But I don't expect him to be putting up 149 receptions. I don't expect for him to be the number one receiver in the league. Because at the end of the day, he hasn't played football consistently in 3 years.
Mm-hmm.
He's closing in, if he hasn't already got to that magic number of 30. He's either 29 or 30.
He is 30.
He is
30 in March, yeah.
So I don't expect for him to just light it up, but I do expect him to make an impact and make a difference and be a big part of what the Saints want to do moving forward. And Bob and I have talked about this. You look at like Olave and Shaheed, who are the projected 2 and 3 on this roster. You couldn't have those guys be 1 and 2. It was evident last year. And that's not a diss on either of them. But to not have a big physical body to complement the two of them would be a disaster. Now, you could sit there and be like, well, Brendan, they have Brian Edwards. They drafted A.T. Perry. But you're talking about a guy like Mike Thomas who, if he did not get hurt, is potentially looking at a Hall of Fame-like career. So, again, don't think he's going to sit there and light anything up, but he's certainly going to show flashes in the pan of the Michael Thomas that Saints fans know and love. And even with the couple games he played last year, the Atlanta game, he had the 2 big touchdown grabs. But you look statistically, and I was like, oh, he only had like 44 yards. Or maybe in the 60s. I could be, mixing games up. But you look statistically, and it's like, don't have. It's not anything spectacular. But it was a flash in the pan. And that's what you're looking for.
See, I don't. The 3 games that Michael Thomas played last year, he averaged almost six catches, per game, which is only slightly lower than his career per game average, and had I think 170, 180 yards. So that's the Mike. I'm not going by that 2019 Michael Thomas either, because anybody that is, you're not being fair. You're not being honest with yourself, and you're not being fair to Michael Thomas. Because like Brendan said, the man has played 10 games in the last 3 years. 10 out of the last 50 games he's played. So to have that kind of expectation on him coming out of the gate, I think that's fantasy land. But I'm judging by the 3 games that we saw from him last year. And the thing here's what I'm encouraged about Michael Thomas. Mike was never that Brandon Cooks, Devery Henderson, Robert Meacham type of speed burner. He's a guy that just beat the hell out of defenses over the middle and through the intermediate zones. That's what made him unguardable. His physicality, his iron, his surefire hands. And for my money, he's the most precise route runner in the league today. And we saw evidence of all 3 of those things in the first 3 games last year. I do expect 1,000-yard year out of Michael Thomas. I don't expect a 1,500 plus year. I certainly don't expect a 149 catch year, but I expect somewhere between 85 and 100 balls caught, and around 1,000 to 1,100 yards. Anything more than that, I'm going to say that something went wrong somewhere along the line for the Saints offense, because I'm tempering expectations for Michael Thomas, not because of his injury history, but because of the other weapons around him. Chris Olave, Rashid Shaheed, Alvin Kamara, Jamal Williams, Foster Moreau, Jawan Johnson, Kendre Miller. All those weapons, plus the fact that you have a very, very conservative head coach, at least on the offensive end. I know Dennis Allen doesn't call the offensive system, offensive plays, but Dennis Allen is in charge of the game day strategy. So this is not for anybody that sits here and wants to compare this receiving core and this quarterback combination to the mid part of last decade when Breeze and all those guys were lighting it up. Yeah, Carr is nowhere near as talented as Prime Breeze, but this receiving core, if healthy, is very similarly talented to that team. But it's going to be a different game day approach. They're not. Dennis Allen wants to run the ball and control, play physical football and control the ball, control the time of possession. So that way, the defense is going to be in position to win games. So, if Michael Thomas has 140 catches and 1,500 yards, like I said, two things went wrong. Number one, they're not controlling the ball like Dennis Allen wants them to, and number two, all those other weapons, something happened to them. Either they fell off a cliff or they got hurt or something. This football is going to be spread around quite a bit. There's a lot of people that are going to get touches. I think we'll see games where we all sit back and say, that's the Michael Thomas, that we saw from 2008 to 2016 through 2019. But it's not going to be on a week in, week out basis because A, it doesn't have to be. B, this is not going to be the way the Saints play the game. Drew Brees in 2018 and 19, outside of Kamara, he didn't have a whole lot of other people to target other than Michael Thomas. Derek Carr has the luxury that Drew Brees didn't. But health-wise, I expect to see a healthy Michael Thomas because this man is playing for a contract. He's playing with a chip on his shoulder. Don't let him fool you. He pays very close attention to social media and what people say, what y'all are say about him. The negative comments, and that's what's going to fuel him this year. We're going to see a very motivated, very focused, very intense Michael Thomas, in my opinion.
I think so. Going back to two things that you said, the 18, 19 years, even the 20 year for Drew. Yeah. Just imagine if he got a number 2 receiver, right? If Dez didn't get hurt, one of the biggest what ifs. Now, for me, I don't think that's a perfect example. I didn't expect Dez Bryant to come in and flash, old Dez Bryant. Did I expect him to be a solid number 2 target, better than what anybody else was on the roster? Yes, I did. I expected him to get attention, which was going to help. If Antonio Brown decided just not to show up with cameras to the facility.
If Antonio Brown wasn't Antonio Brown.
Nah, come on. And I say we can't live in Madden world all the time, but on paper, if you could have put up with that for half a year and you were going to win a Super Bowl, I think it would have been okay. Mike Thomas on one side, Antonio Brown on the other would have been crazy.
Yeah. I mean, in Madden world and, for 6, 8, 10 games, if you could put up with it. Yeah. I mean, that's a Super Bowl team, no doubt.
But nonetheless, Drew didn't have a number 2 option. And then you look at this, what if Drew had Chris Olave? Well, those teams were winning Super Bowls. At the end of the day, Mike Thomas wasn't breaking records, but the team was winning Super Bowls. I also like the fact that you said that this is a different team design. And this is a team that's going to want to run the football and pound the football and control the clock. That's very evident in two things that happened this offseason. I don't think either of them are under the radar things. I think they go unnoticed, not as prominent in the spotlight of things. Bob, these might be article ideas. Just give me some credit. the two things that really stood out to me that set the tone for what this team is going to be offensively. Obviously getting Derek Carr, but that's not the direction I'm going. The direction I'm going is the reports that Taysom Hill is finally done being whatever they tried to make Taysom be the last 2 years, I think is one of the most vital parts of that.
If it happens, yeah.
Right, if that actually happens. But what we saw Taysom Hill being used towards the back end of the year when he was touching the ball 9-10 times a game, yeah, that kind of sets the tone for what the Saints want to do. Additionally, the two running backs they brought in this offseason in Jamal Williams, everybody's excited, but nobody's talking about, well, wait a minute. Jamal does show that he can catch the ball, right? But is definitely more of a, I'm going to pound it in your face type of running back than Mark Ingram was the last couple years. And that's just because he still probably has a little gas in the tank, but he's certainly not, the boom and zoom Mark Ingram that he was. And then you go get Kendre Miller, who, a lot of us are sitting there going, oh, it would make a lot of sense if the Saints drafted a guy that, kind of mimicked what Alvin Kamara is, get a kind of a scat backy type of guy. The Saints go, nah, we're going to get a guy that's going to break your nose. That can also catch the ball out of the backfield when given the opportunity. That sets the tone for what this offense is going to be.
Mm-hmm.
So for all the people that really supported and loved what I did when I covered fantasy football, here's your fantasy football nugget of the summer, because I haven't had one in quite a while. The Saints offense is going to be one of the hardest things to project week in and week out. Just like it was last year. It was damn near impossible last year when I was writing articles to tell you who to start on a week-to-week basis. It's going to be the same exact thing this year, outside of maybe Chris Olave. Olave is going to be, if you have Olave, start him every week. Outside of Olave, even with the Kamara suspension looming, I don't think we ever see the fantasy production Alvin Kamara that we did early in his career ever again. It's going to be a shared backfield.
Yeah.
That's going to hurt him fantasy-wise. That's going to really help his career, though. It's going to prolong his career. Jamal Williams is not going to be a guy that leads the league in rushing touchdowns again. Can almost guarantee it. Because, well, you got Jamal, you get Miller, you get Taysom Hill, who is not supposed to be a tight end this year. He's supposed to be whatever Taysom Hill is. There was a Gridiron Heights on that one year, if you're familiar with the Bleacher.
Yeah.
Like there was one is what is Taysom Hill? And it was like a Christmas episode. It was gold.
I loved it, actually. I love those pieces.
Somebody go find that for me and drop the link. But yeah, the Saints offense, like, don't draft Alvin Kamara early. Don't draft Michael Thomas early. Like, don't draft any Saints players early. And I'm going to go out on a limb here as well and say, don't draft Derek Carr. Now, some people might think I'm crazy for that, but I cannot project Derek Carr to be a top 15 fantasy quarterback because I don't know how much he's going to throw the football.
Right there, if you are going to draft a Saints player, the quarterback, now I wouldn't draft Derek Carr as my QB1, no doubt. No way. But I'd still expect anywhere from 3,800 to 4,000, 4,100 yards from Carr. That's about an average of 245, 250 a game. I can see that. I think Derek will have about 28, 30 touchdowns. He'll have a lower interception rate than what he did his last couple of years with the Raiders. So he's going to be a solid quarterback play. If I were forced to draft one, but only one Saints offensive player, it would actually be Derek Carr because I believe the red zone production is going to be there.
Yeah, I understand. I could understand where you're coming from. Just looking at even the numbers you just gave and considering Derek Carr is not going to rack up rushing yards like a Mahomes or an Allen or a Lamar Jackson or a Jalen Hurts. It takes Derek Carr out of top quarterbacks.
Yeah.
And with that, like you just said, he's not a QB1. So I wouldn't be drafting Carr. I would be drafting Carr as a bench quarterback. If you have bye weeks, better matchups, quarterback
Hmm.
one gets hurt, good option to get you by. But Saints fantasy is going to be a headache this year. The
Yeah.
defense should be still be a solid option.
Yeah.
But offensively,
Assuming he stays healthy, Will Lutz is a solid option for kicker.
he had a bad year last year.
He did.
Last year.
Yeah, but coming out of fantasy and going back onto the field, think of the quandary that defensive coordinators are now in. In the last few years, and even the last couple of years of Drew's career, going into a game, if I was a defensive coordinator, I would have nightmares about trying to figure out how to contain Michael Thomas and Alvin Kamara. But knowing that if I could contain both of them, I stand a pretty good chance of it bottling up the Saints offense. Now the quandary is, who do I focus on? Do I focus on, and again, this is assuming, knock on wood, that Michael Thomas is healthy. You have Kamara, Jamal. Leave rookies out of it for a second because we don't know what they're going to do. But you have Kamara, Jamal Williams, Michael Thomas, Juwan Johnson put up very good fantasy numbers for a tight end last year.
He was one of the more consistent starts last year in those articles.
Yeah. Foster Moreau, of course, Olave. Shaheed. Shaheed was the most productive Saints receiver over the last 8 games of the year last year. Shaheed too. And then you get Kamara back from suspension. We do believe that Kendre Miller is going to be a viable part of the offense. Those are awful lot of footballs to spread around, but that's also an awful lot of talent to come in a defense with. So fantasy wise, it might be a nightmare, but it's a dream come true for Pete Carmichael if he's not the Pete Carmichael that we've seen the last 2 or 3 years.
Well, let's be honest. Some of the most prominent Saints offensive years, it was kind of like that. It was hard to predict week in and week out. And a lot of it had to do with the running
Graham, Lance Moore, Pierre Thomas, Darren Sproles, and/or Reggie Bush, depending on the era. Mark Ingram. On paper, it's a similar setup that the Saints have going into this year.
Exactly. And I think for, like you said, for the team, it's great. For fantasy owners, it's really frustrating. The Saints have had running backs by committee for years. Finally think they figure it out, and now Alvin Kamara finally back in running back by committee. And then even with receivers, I mean, the years before Jimmy Graham, you had Marcus Colston, and really no viable week in, week out option after that. Then you get Jimmy Graham, and you're at the end of Marcus Colston, and you have Darren Sproles. Kind of like there was a lot of years where it was like I have a guy or two. Drew was always a guy you could be a quarterback one, but you had a guy or two, and now you're back to I think I have a single guy that I can put in week to week. So it'll be interesting. It'll be interesting for sure. As we wrap up, Bob, let's do some daughter drops with OTAs, and we'll close out the night like that. So from me to you, daughter drop, your guy, Rashid Shaheed, is the star of OTAs for the New Orleans Saints.
From the things I've seen and from a lot of the things that I've heard, I'm going to say Dot. Rashid Shaheed, he's put on some muscle, gained some weight, looking extremely confident. Obviously he's going up against very, very talented defensive backs too. And again, I don't put, and I know you don't either. We don't put a lot of stock into the stars or the struggles of OTAs. But early on, going against shadows and competing in shorts. I forget what NFL player worded this earlier this week. Basically competing in pajamas. But Rashid Shaheed looks like a tough stop. So yeah, I'm going to say Dot. Oh gosh, mine to you. This is a projected daughter drop. Jake Haener will play well enough to give coaches the confidence to at least dangle Jameis Winston as trade bait.
This is going to be a weird answer. I'm going to drop the first half of the question, dot the back half of the question. And what I mean by that is I don't think Haener does enough to solidify himself as a potential backup quarterback if something happens. I do believe, regardless of how he plays, the Saints will field offers for Jameis Winston.
Fair.
Because there's teams with uncertainty. I mean, obviously the Raiders are the biggest one. But there's going to be teams that have freak injuries. Happens every preseason.
Mm-hmm.
And they're going to be looking for quarterbacks. And say what you will about Jameis Winston. He's a proven NFL starter.
Mm-hmm.
He's a Pro Bowler once in his career. And up until the injury a couple years ago, he was playing pretty good football for New
Mm-hmm.
Orleans. There's going to be someone tempted enough to dangle draft picks.
Mm-hmm.
And I think New Orleans is smart to listen.
I'll tell you what, on a sidetrack to that, I realize, and I agree with them. I realize that people, if the Saints traded Jameis Winston tomorrow, I realized that people wouldn't feel comfortable with a rookie like Jake Haener as your backup to Derek Carr, and I'm not sure I would either. But there's two names still floating out there that if they traded Jameis Winston tomorrow, they could pick up a guy like a Teddy Bridgewater or a Nick Foles who would be content and reliable as a number 2 quarterback. That's just a quick sidebar.
Nick Foles, one of the best nicknames in football. I cannot say it on the podcast.
I'd feel free to say it, but it's already late. I won't ruin it. I won't bring our rating down with literally seconds left in the show.
Exactly. Teddy, we talked about Saints Hall of Famers earlier, guys that are borderline, and I'm not saying Teddy is by any means, but you want to talk about guys that are beloved for very short periods of their Saints career.
Yeah.
Right, and that's not just the Saints, that's any franchise. You can pick towards and you could say one name, an entire franchise is and then you let them know, hey man, they only played one season for you. We'll do that to close the show. We did our daughter drops. Let's give your top 3. I don't want to say one-hit wonders or one-season wonders, but we can call it that. Your top 3 one-season wonders for the New Orleans Saints. Close it out.
Oh God, that's tough.
Guys that live in your heart for the very minimal and short time they were in New Orleans.
Me personally, or the general?
Personally.
Me personally.
Everybody has a different answer to this.
Yeah, me personally, flash in the pan type of situations. Nick Fairley is one.
That's a good one. That is a good one.
Yeah, Nick Fairley is one for sure. Janoris Jenkins.
That's a good one too.
Was a huge Jackrabbit fan. And
that was recency bias, those two answers.
It is, and I'm trying not to stay. I'm trying not to stay recent here. Wow. And wow. A guy I always love to watch. And his son is a very talented tight end in the NFL now. He's a friend of the show. We show personal bias for our friends Jim Everett and Quinn earlier. So we'll do it to another guy, Irv Smith.
Yeah. beloved guys. That's the best. Maybe one season wonders wasn't the best, but most beloved Saints, like beloved short stinted Saints, might have been the best way to put that.
And by the Jim will qualify because he was only a Saint for what, 4 years? Yeah, not even a full 4 full years. But he was like, next to John Elway, and I've told him this. I fanboyed it a little bit. Next to John Elway, who is an idol of mine, Jim Everett was my second favorite quarterback to watch through that era, and that was the era I grew up watching football. Warren Moon, Jim Kelly, Joe Montana, Danny Fouts, Terry, the end of Terry Bradshaw. Next to John Elway, Jim Everett was my favorite quarterback to watch.
How about that? Dan Marino too, in that era. Who for me favorite short stinted Saints? Teddy. I loved the Teddy Bridgewater. Like that, those 5 games were so much fun. And it's not because Teddy threw up these numbers, right? Like he did enough to win the games. He managed the games. But it was the energy of Teddy Bridgewater. Because it wasn't so much like the flashiness of it. It was so much that you saw light. When Drew got hurt, like the air was sucked out, right?
Yeah.
So you want to talk about breathing new life into a franchise? Teddy did that. But we also saw life back in Teddy Bridgewater.
Mm-hmm.
And like that's super magical. And I know it didn't work out after New Orleans and Carolina. It didn't work out in Denver. It didn't work out in Miami. But we saw like Teddy Bridgewater again. We saw first round pick out of Louisville, like ready to dominate the league, Teddy Bridgewater. And that's really cool because not everybody gets the redemption story. And Teddy went from a guy who almost lost his leg to earning an $80 million contract on a 5-game span.
Yeah.
Like, good for Teddy. Super happy for Teddy Bridgewater. So that one is always up there that year for Teddy. Friend of the show, 2015 Delvin Bro.
Yeah.
No doubt.
As soon as I said Irv Smith, I was like, how could I forget Delvin? But that's a great
Delvin
one.
Bro, 2015. If he was, and we've told him this, I've told him this. If it wasn't for the fact he was on one of the historically worst defenses ever, should have been a Pro Bowl or whether it was a Pro Bowl alternate, like he played that well that season. I'll try not to have recency biased as well. It's a little hard because I'm young. All I know is the Drew Brees era. I mean the Aaron Brooks as well. Oh man. Trying to think of like some of my personally, we're not going off of like Saints fans everywhere, so I can say this personally, and I've always said he was one of my favorite Saints, was Joe Morgan.
Yeah, I like Joe.
Like, and he could run one route.
Yeah, yeah,
but he could run it well. I loved the couple years of Joe Morgan. The one touchdown against Tampa Bay was crazy. Those are some of my favorite, like, near and dear in my heart type of random Saints. So yeah, Teddy, Delvin, and then Joe Morgan for sure. It's a weird list. Those are weird lists. You could do that for any team. You could do that for any team.
Yeah.
You guys know I'm a big NBA guy. Like I could sit here and tell you my favorite 1-year wonders in Charlotte. Like you get these weird connections with guys, and then you're like, oh, and then you look back and you go, oh, that was only 1 year. And it feels like 5. You're like, wow, that was only 16 games. Or like for Teddy, like that was only 5 games. For Delvin is a good example of a guy who really his 3rd year, he was hurt. So it was really like 20 something games. And you're like, there's no way. Like it had to go longer than that. But, and for Joe Morgan, he was a 2 or 3 years. He might have stuck around a little bit longer. He might have been one of those wide receiver 5s that stuck around for a while.
Yeah, he was, 3 or 4 years. But like you said, wide receiver 4, wide receiver 5 range. I always like Brandon Coleman,
That's a good one.
Willie Jackson from those
2000s.
from those Aaron Brooks years.
Yeah.
Willie Jackson was always a favorite of mine, and Willie had the wonderful playoff game against the Rams, 3 touchdown catches, had 1,000-yard year the year after, and then never heard from again.
Those are the best. Those are the best players. Like, and I've seen like TikToks on it, and it's like, what do it was a TikTok. It was something along the lines of like, girlfriend asked like, "Oh, you just saw your buddy. What did you guys do?" And it was like, "You want the honest answer?" It's like we sat for 4 hours and talked about the best role players in the NFC South in the 2000s.
Yep.
And you're like, "Yep, that's super accurate." When you're just chatting it up with friends about sports, it's never about the superstars. It's always about, man, you remember so and so who had like an 8-sack season, and then nobody ever heard of him again. Or in basketball, you remember that one guy that was like the 10th man for so and so. It's always like that. And
I had 1 or 2 friends back in my drinking days, and I guess I could still call them friends, but that's literally all we did. I don't think. I'm not certain we'd have known each other's last names otherwise. That's how little we talked about anything else. But that's all we did was get together, drink, and talk about our favorite respective team. And all 3 of us had different favorite teams, so we could all just go on rants, about these obscure players to the average fan.
And see, that's the best. And you and I have we both are sports card collectors. I have a box for it. It's sitting right there in my eyesight. I've never shipped that out. So now it's on air.
I'm starting to gather up stuff for you, so it's okay.
Okay, so it's on air now. Like, I do have a package. You guys can hold me accountable. It's got to go out to Bob next week. But nonetheless, like, that's the best part for me going to these card shows, which I go to 1 or 2 a month, is looking and like. Here's a perfect example. Like 2 months ago, I go to a show, and there's a guy. He's got like a value box, like $2 cards. I'm just flipping through there, looking, and I geeked out. I had a moment. Oh my god! I pull out a card. My buddy's next to me. He's like, "What did you find? Like, you found a really good deal for $2?" Like, no, dude. Austin Carr got an autographed Saints card.
Wow.
Like, who? And I was like, Austin Carr. Like, preseason wonder for the Patriots. Like, whatever year. Like, what are you talking about? You know who Austin Carr is? And like, wait a minute. I'm the only person in this entire building that knows who Austin Carr is. But it's things like that. It's that's the stuff that makes it fun, is going and finding your obscure guys and talking about those obscure guys. But nonetheless, enough about really obscure, short-stinted Saints.
Hopefully, yeah, we went off the rails a little bit.
That's fun. That's what these podcasts are for, especially this time of year. Here's a good one. This is from Gumbo. I was about to say that name too. The very first name he put out here, Boo Williams, was a guy.
I love Boo Williams, and I love Norman Hand too.
That was one I was really thinking, was Boo Williams, mostly because it was a fun name. Like, I was a kid when Boo Williams was playing. You're like, there's a guy named Boo. That's awesome.
We could get Boo on the show. I got his number. It's been a while since I've talked to him.
Hey, we are fans of talking to former New Orleans Saints, whether they were a couple year wonders, whether they were long-term guys, it doesn't matter. Picking a lot of these guys' minds is awesome. I know you guys watching love it. I know that we really enjoy it. We've talked so highly about some of the guys we've had on the show that are still great football minds. So we'll have some guys, especially as we continue on through the off season. I would definitely like to have some guys on during training camp, because I think for us covering the team, we view training camp one way. People who are watching this or just kind of keep up on Twitter or ESPN when they do their camp to camp tour, they think of training camp a whole different way. And then you have the players who think of training camp a whole different way. I would love to get players' perspective on like how hard training camp is. to really voice that on and just, give people the perspective, especially roster bubble guys. And I know we have contacts with guys that were definitely roster bubble guys over the years. And I think everybody's a roster bubble guy at some point in their career, early, late. There's a point where you're like, I really don't know if I'm making this team.
Yeah.
And the day-to-day stresses of all that. I think that is a beautiful thing that we could talk about coming up. Before we actually close the door on this one, if you guys haven't already, subscribe to Bottom of the Mug Productions. You've missed out on some really awesome stuff over the last week. The headliner is Bob Rose. We talked
the low light.
Do what?
The low light.
The highlight. You'll really appreciate it after I tell you some of the things we've had this week too. But Bob Rose talked to us on the Thoughts of Brewing podcast, which is a podcast we bring on just your average Joes, keep the coffee puns going, and we just sit and we talk about their life experiences, because I think at the end of the day, we get caught up with what celebrities are doing and their stories and how inspirational they are. We forget to talk to our neighbors or the people we, watch on podcasts every week and this and that, and the kind of the life stories they have. Bob's got an incredible story talking about obviously what he does now as a journalist, his playing career as a pro and volleyball guy, his Hall of Fame coaching career. But the most important part of the conversation was his battle with addiction. And just what that looks like on a day-to-day, from day to day, what that looks like. Bob, 16 years sober now?
Yeah, almost coming up on.
Almost 16 years sober, so applaud to that. But you described it still as a daily battle. And you opened my eyes to things that I didn't know. I know people that will listen to the podcast will feel the same way. So if you guys haven't, please check that out. I will retweet it again this evening, and I'm sure Bob will as well. You can check it out on our social medias. That was about an hour and 5-minute conversation between myself, Bob, and my co-host Thomas Manning. So please go check that out. I know that both of us would certainly appreciate that. And hopefully with your guys' help in sharing that as well, it reaches the people it needs to, because it doesn't matter how many listens we get. As long as podcasts like that reach the one person it's supposed to reach, we're all good. Additionally, had some other fun stuff with Bottom of the Mug in association with Meet Me at the Movies. Thomas Manning sat down with some of the cast of Ted Lasso to talk about the show and is it actually over, or if it was just the end of season 3. He also had a really good one that came out today. He spoke with hip hop icon Common. And talked about some of his movies and his career as he kind of dives into different paths. So make sure you check that out. You can check that out on the Bottom of the Mug Twitter page at BOTMPROD. Now for Bob, where can people follow you?
First of all, it was an honor to sit down with you and Thomas. I know we could have just BS'd on and on. The show might have been an hour and 5 minutes. I think the three of us chatted for well over 2 hours. But it was a privilege to talk to you guys. And I will. I know you sent me the link. I will get around to populating it through my Facebook as well. Speaking of, folks, you can follow me on Facebook, Bob Rose. I am over on Twitter at BobbyR2613. All of us, I didn't put one out today, but I do put out daily content, pretty much daily content, covering the New Orleans Saints for the Saints News Network at Saints News on Twitter, or we do just follow us, go on to the SI.com team page. We do the majority of the coverage for the New Orleans Saints for SportsIllustrated.com. And also, don't forget to support Brendan and I personally and our product for the Bayou Blitz. Bayou Blitz on Twitter, or at Bayou Blitz Pod on Twitter, or the Bayou Blitz Facebook page. And we do have a YouTube channel too that you could just subscribe to. Just pound that subscribe button. Let us know what you think. This is your show. So Brendan and I want to hear your feedback. We want to hear your criticisms, as hurtful as they could be. And we want to hear your ideas, what you want to hear from your show, and from us, your hosts, for upcoming shows, different coverage ideas, different content ideas. Y'all have done a great job so far, of growing our product. And it is all of our product together, because we are all family. We are your Bayou Blitz family. You've done a great job so far, so please keep it going. And from the bottom of both of our hearts, we want to thank you for what you've done for us already.
Absolutely. For myself, you can follow me on Instagram and Twitter at BT Boylan. Thank you guys so much for all the support that you show here at the Bayou Blitz. Obviously, our personal endeavors as well. I saw another comment come in. I do want to get to it because there's another good short stinted Saint as we continue that conversation even now. Tim Hightower. That was a really good one too.
That was a good one.
So, quick shout out to Bob from Facebook. Great answer. That was a really fun one, and especially because he torched the Saints in 2009 playoffs, right? First play of the game.
Yeah.
So kind of full circle thing. And he has a great story too. But you can follow me again. You can follow me. You see it there. You can follow Bob. You see it on that side. Until next week. Catch up with everything with Bottom of the Mug Productions. Please tune into that podcast with Bob. I think it was a really special conversation, Bob. Right back at you, man. It was a joy and honor to be able to kind of bring that story to the people that need to hear it. And looking forward to seeing how it kind of populates and affects people. Guys, follow Bob's work, follow John's work, Ross's work, Kyle's work over at the Saints News Network. They're doing awesome stuff during the off season. Bob really slacking. Didn't write an article today. What happened? Like, come on, man.
They were working on our roof. So I had me and Will were trapped inside all day. They dropped tarps over our building, so we were shrouded in darkness, with all kinds of hammering, and like the air quality wasn't bad enough. There was drywall and crap flying through the air. It was a nightmare. However, I probably could have worked a little bit. I decided to use it as an excuse to take a lighter day off.
That's okay. That's okay. It's summer for Will, so he totally expects you to be around 24/7 anyway. Hey, joys of being a dad, right? I wouldn't know. But guys, until next week, follow us over on Twitter. And until then, find some peace, spread love, practice positivity. That's Bob Rose. I'm Brendan Boylan. See you next week. Bayou Blitz Podcast.